why is it important for, let's say, for kids to be exposed to this music? What do they benefit? And on the opposite end of the spectrum, what do they lose if this music disappears?
They're losing a historical value of the songs that were used to distribute the news at one time. Songs about Timothy Merrick, who was bitten by a rattlesnake, the first folk song in America, the Springfield Mountain. They would never know that. And history is boring, but if you do it in a song form, well, history is, I'll say, history is not always boring, but to kids, generally speaking, they go, history is boring. And if you put it in a song form, it's interesting. It makes it more interesting. So they'd be losing. It's like historical buildings that get torn down. You don't want to see that. And it's a part of our heritage. I want to keep it going, and I think it's a worthy thing to do.
Clearly, you are very interested in technology. How did that interest start?
I started getting interested in technology, well, before the transistor radio. When I was 3 years old, my grandfather, who was an engineer in Chicago, was responsible for helping to build some of the bridges that span the Chicago River, used to take me to the Museum of Science and Industry on the south side. And I loved that place. And I'd go in there and press buttons and things would whir and light up. And I just fell in love with technology then. And as time went on, I got more and more into it. I've never lost my love of technology.
And you've been pretty well ahead of the game. At least everything I've read about you going back to the 60s, you've had certainly the home electronics years before everybody else. VCRs, portable recorders of various kinds, and now, I mean, obviously it's gone through the roof here, but...
Yeah, I want to show you one item like that's right in that category. So technology has always fascinated me, and this is one of the things that was a bit ahead of the curve. I got this in I believe 71 or 2, and it looks like a normal attaché case, but it's got a telephone in it, and there's an antenna in there, and it used to work like this. You'd turn it on. It goes on now, but there's nobody on the other end because they've deactivated all these frequencies. But you go, mobile operator, this is JR49950 Los Angeles Registry, and I'd like to call 555-1212, and she'd say, just a moment, please, and it would ring. And you'd be talking to somebody. Now, back in 1972, that was unheard of for a portable device like this. I used to use it on airplanes. I'd get the captain's permission, and they'd usually give it to you. They'd say, okay, 25-watt transmitter. You know, we can't even use a 0.6-watt cell phone on an airplane, but 25-watt transmitter. You'd wait for a city to show up on the horizon, and you'd key the thing, and you'd get the mobile operator, and you had about 10 minutes before the city would pass by, and you'd be out of range. And then you'd wait for another one. It was so cool.
The fact that you record, mix, and release this yourself, this is obviously a model that's worked for you, and I think it's pretty safe to say that you're a pioneer in this field and a highly visible, successful musician that's done all of this independently. You sort of serve as an example for other musicians. Would you ever consider doing a tutorial of any kind, or have you already done something like that to guide other musicians to follow in your footsteps?
I have a DVD called Roger McGuinn's How to Record on a Computer recording DVD from Homespun tapes. And so that's a tutorial. It's a bit dated now. It doesn't have the latest equipment or software in it, but it might be time to do an updated one. But I'm very, very enthusiastic about it. I got into it back in 1991 when Terry Melcher called me and said, I'd like you to play on a Beach Boys album. And I flew out to California and went over to his house, and I expected he was going to take me down to the studio and we were going to start recording the Beach Boys album. But no, he had an early version of Pro Tools running in the living room and a couple of nice mics, and we did the Beach Boys album in his living room. And it was just a real eye-opener because up until that time, it took about $1 million to get all the gear together to make a decent album. The recording equipment was extremely expensive. I mean, a good Studer 24-track was, you know, $30,000, $40,000. Like some of the expensive, more like the 64-track recorders were $250,000, and then the board was another couple of $100,000. And it was the kind of thing that made artists have to sign these terrible contracts with record companies so that the record companies who had all the money could afford to pay for the studio costs, because they were sometimes $1,000 a day or more. and you couldn't afford to record on your own. Well, with the advent of these, what they call a DAW, Digital Audio Workstation, artists can do their own thing for under $2,000, usually a couple of $1,000. You got enough to $1 million studio. I remember when I showed up at Pete Seeger's house with the recording gear, his wife Toshi said, "Wow, you got $1 million studio in a box," and I did.